Now, once again, we've got rioting in the streets of the US, and once again it's been fuelled by a real tragedy. A grand jury decided the 3 police officers involved in the shooting death of Breonna Taylor in March during a police raid would not be charged directly over her death. 2 will face no charges at all, and 1 a charge of wanton endangerment. In this incident, the police did not fire the first shot, but it has become another emblematic case in the Black Lives Matter movement. And as protesters reacted to the grand jury decision in Louisville, Kentucky, and created chaos across that state, many turned to vandalism and violence, and 2 police were shot. Earlier today, I spoke to Cameron Stewart, the Australian's US correspondent and Sky News contributor. Cameron Stewart, thanks for joining us again. There's so much happening. Let's start with the riots in Kentucky in reaction to what's been decided when it comes to the tragic death of Breonna Taylor.
Yeah, it's a remarkable events today, Chris, in the sense that the 3 officers who were involved in the shooting of Breonna Taylor, of course, that was in a botched drug raid. They came into the apartment and they fired a lot of shots. Her boyfriend, Breonna Taylor, fired a shot at the police, not knowing they were police, and the police let off a fuselage of bullets, killing 26-year-old Breonna Taylor. She's become, in a sense, of a bit of a George Floyd in the US, a real sort of symbol of what people say is bad behaviour by the police. Today, the grand jury in Kentucky decided not to charge any of the 3 policemen in direct relation to her death, although they did charge 1 policeman with wanton endangerment for recklessly shooting his gun, but it wasn't in relation to her actual death. So this has triggered a lot of anger amongst in legal circles and obviously amongst protesters and Black Lives Matter movement. And so what we're seeing as we speak, literally, pretty rugged scenes unfolding on the streets in Louisville, Kentucky, clashes between police and protesters, some fairly violent, obviously quite a few arrests and then reports of 1 policeman being shot.
It's shocking stuff, and each of these incidents, of course, there's a law and order and justice process to follow through, but there's also the political environment. We've had months of protests and riots, and of course the Democrats are on one side of this argument when it comes to police brutality and whether or not there should be reforms. Donald Trump standing very much on the side of the police and law and order. It's hard to take the politics out of this. To what extent do you think the public debate fuels the violence, the sort of violence we're seeing today?
Look, I think it does. Certainly, in recent months, you've seen in America, every single time there's been a protest, there's been, most of them have been peaceful, but there have been violent changes, absolutely. In the end of these protests, we've seen a lot of destruction, and we've seen the public sentiment here move a little bit less in favour of some of these protests because of the violence, Chris. Whether it actually has a bigger impact on the campaign is not at all clear, because Donald Trump, despite his strong law and order message, has not really gained ground on Joe Biden in recent weeks. And this flare-up in Louisville is the first one we've had for a little while. So I'm not sure it's particularly gaining traction, but we'll see what happens after this. But you're absolutely right. These issues are getting wound up in the election campaign. Trump was asked about it at his press conference. He gave a fairly careful answer, but he also made the point that, which he has made in the campaign trail, that with unemployment being so low before the pandemic, African Americans benefited greatly from his presidency. So that's a message that he's actually giving out at the moment.
But also, even though we've got this environment of unrest and violence, the President was asked at his press conference today about a peaceful transference of power after the election. Let's have a look at his response.
Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transferal of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. You know it, and you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else.
Cameron Stewart, is that responsible, an answer like that?
Look, I don't think it is responsible, Chris, to be honest. I mean, he was asked, he didn't promise a peaceful transfer of power. Of course, that's different from contesting the election. You can contest the election in the Supreme Court in all sorts of legal ways, but you'd want to have a peaceful transfer of power at some point. But look, with Donald Trump, he says this stuff, and you're not quite sure to what extent he is playing a game. He's obviously joked several times about wanting to extend the presidential term beyond 8 years. I think even though there is a lot of hyperventilating about that actual comment tonight, I'm never quite sure with Donald Trump when he says this stuff how serious he really is. But certainly on the face of it, it's something that he shouldn't have said. Yeah,
and I think a literal translation, a literal interpretation is pretty bad. But I think what he's talking about is whether the result will be contested or not. Now, we've seen previous presidential election results contested in the courts, and this one possibly could be. The reason he's really focused on that is the mail-out ballots. This is going to be very significant, isn't it? Just the extent to which mail-out ballots are used and the extent to which it lifts the Democrat vote, I suppose.
Well, that's right, because the mail-out ballots, Chris, are very much party partisan, really. I mean, Democrats, the majority of Democrats say they will actually vote by mail. Republicans say they won't, of course. And so you're going to have a situation where if there was any fraud in relation to this, obviously there'd be contested aspects because there'd be a lot more Democrat votes in the mail. And we're going to have the very strange experience, and certainly for reporters like you and I who will be here, where we might not get a result on the night because a lot of these postal ballots in some of the states are not allowed to be counted until the actual day, which takes quite a while. So you could actually have a situation where no one knows who's won the presidential election for at least a couple of days, if not longer, which is an extraordinary situation.
It is going to be extraordinary. People will need to be restrained and cool, and we haven't seen a lot of that of late. Just one other issue, though, before we let you go, Cam, is on the weekend we expect to hear the name put forward by Donald Trump when it comes to the Supreme Court.
That's right. We're going to hear who is actually chosen. It's obviously going to be a woman of some standing in the Conservative world. This will give a 6-3 majority to the court, assuming that he can install this lady before the election, which does look like it's going to be the case, Chris. The Republicans have won that debate fairly comprehensively by the looks of it. And so that will be a very big moment for Donald Trump supporters, for his base. I spent a lot of time out in Trump country, and these issues in the Supreme Court are very, very important to Republicans. And so, the prospect is it will actually help him. We'll see how it goes. That's the first thing. And the second big thing that's going to happen, of course, is next week, the first debate. And I think these two things, the Supreme Court issue and the potential for Donald Trump in the first debate against Joe Biden, they're the sort of issues that I think the Trump campaign is looking to change their fortunes a bit and catch up that 7-point gap with Joe Biden.
Can't wait to see that first debate. Thanks for joining us again, Cam.
Pleasure.
Fascinating times in the US again.